There are ships of the line, vessels that turned the tide of battle through overwhelming firepower. There are ships of legend, ghost vessels and heroic flagships whose names echo through maritime lore. And then there is the Russian cruiser Aurora. It is a warship that rests silently in the cold waters of the Neva River in St. Petersburg, a veteran of one of history's most brutal naval battles. But its fame, its immortal place in history, comes not from a battle it won, but from a single solitary shot fired from its forward gun. It was a blank, a thunderous noise without a projectile, but it signaled the death of an empire and the birth of a superpower. This is the incredible story of a ship that was built to serve a tsar, but chose instead to serve a revolution. At the turn of the 20th century, Imperial Russia was a giant stirring from a long slumber. Under Tsar Nicholas II, the empire was industrializing, expanding, and looking to project its power across the globe. A key part of this ambition was the Imperial Russian Navy. To compete with the likes of Great Britain, Germany, and the rising power of Japan, Russia needed modern, fast, and powerful warships. Out of this ambition, the Pallada-class of protected cruisers was born. These weren't lumbering battleships. They were designed as long-range commerce raiders and scouts, the eyes and ears of the fleet. The third ship in this class, laid down in St. Petersburg in 1897, was named Aurora, after the Roman goddess of the dawn. When she was launched in 1900, she was a symbol of a new dawn for Russian naval power. Displacing over 6,700 tons, the Aurora was a sleek and formidable vessel for her time. She stretched nearly 416 feet, 127 meters long, and was powered by 3 triple-expansion steam engines, giving her a respectable top speed of 19 knots. Her primary protection came from an arched armored deck that covered her vital machinery and magazines, designed to deflect plunging shells. Her main armament consisted of 8 6-inch, 152mm guns, supplemented by a formidable array of 24 smaller 75mm guns to fend off swift torpedo boats. With a crew of over 570 men, she was a floating steel fortress, painted in the gleaming white and gold livery of a peacetime imperial fleet. In 1903, when she was officially commissioned into the Baltic Fleet, no one could have predicted the almost unbelievable journey that lay ahead. The dawn she would come to represent was not one of imperial glory, but of bloody, world-altering revolution. Her trial by fire would come sooner than anyone expected. In 1904, tensions between Russia and Japan over territorial ambitions in Manchuria and Korea exploded into the Russo-Japanese War. The conflict began with a stunning Japanese surprise attack on the Russian fleet at Port Arthur, crippling Russia's Pacific presence. In St. Petersburg, the Tsar's government was stunned and humiliated. Their response was audacious, some might even say desperate. They would form a new fleet, the Second Pacific Squadron, by stripping the Baltic Fleet of its best ships and send it on an unprecedented voyage halfway around the world to relieve Port Arthur and crush the Japanese Navy. The Aurora was among the vessels chosen for this epic and ultimately doomed undertaking. The journey of the Second Pacific Squadron is one of the most bizarre and calamitous expeditions in naval history. Under the command of Admiral Zinovy Rozhestvensky, a fleet of over 40 warships, many of them outdated and ill-suited for such a voyage, departed in October 1904. The crews were inexperienced, the logistics were a nightmare, and paranoia was rampant. Just days into the journey, in the North Sea, the fleet infamously mistook a fleet of British fishing trawlers for Japanese torpedo boats and opened fire in what became known as the Dogger Bank Incident. They sank 1 trawler, killed 3 fishermen, and nearly triggered a war with Great Britain. It was a humiliating start to an 18,000-mile, 29,000 kilometers voyage that would only get worse. For 7 grueling months, the Aurora and the rest of the squadron steamed south. They rounded Africa, enduring the scorching heat of the tropics. Coal had to be constantly loaded by hand in neutral ports, a back-breaking task for the already exhausted crews. The ship's hulls became fouled with marine growth, slowing them down. Morale plummeted as news reached them that Port Arthur had already fallen to the Japanese. Their mission was now not one of relief, but of revenge. In May 1905, the weary Russian fleet finally reached the Far East and steamed towards the port of Vladivostok, their last remaining Pacific base. Between them and their destination lay the Tsushima Strait, and waiting there was the entirety of the Imperial Japanese Navy, modern, well-trained, and spoiling for a fight. The Battle of Tsushima on May 27, 1905, was not a battle, it was a slaughter. The Japanese fleet, commanded by the brilliant Admiral Togo Heihachiro, was faster, more accurate, and employed superior tactics. They famously crossed the T of the Russian formation, allowing them to bring all their guns to bear on the lead Russian ships, which could only reply with their forward guns. The result was a devastating, one-sided massacre. Russian battleships were systematically blown out of the water. Amidst the chaos, smoke, and thunder of naval gunfire, the cruiser Aurora found itself in the thick of the fighting. She fought valiantly alongside other Russian cruisers, trying to protect their transport ships. But the Japanese fire was relentless. A hail of shells rained down on her. Her captain, Captain First Rank Yevgeny Grigor'ev, was killed instantly on the bridge by shrapnel. The ship suffered multiple hits, her smokestacks were riddled with holes, and over a dozen of her crew were killed, with many more wounded. As the Russian fleet disintegrated, the surviving ships scattered. The Aurora, under the command of her executive officer, was badly damaged but still afloat. Along with two other cruisers, the Oleg and the Jemchug, she managed to break away from the carnage. Fleeing south, they were relentlessly pursued. With their fleet annihilated, and Vladivostok an impossible destination, they made a desperate run for the neutral Philippines. Battered and bloodied, the Aurora limped into the port of Manila. Having survived a battle that saw nearly the entire 2nd Pacific Squadron sunk or captured, her crew was safe. But their war was over. The ship was interned by American authorities until the end of the conflict. The Russo-Japanese War ended in a humiliating defeat for Russia, a shock that sent tremors through the foundation of the Tsarist regime and planted the first seeds of the revolution that was to come. After the war, the Aurora eventually returned to the Baltic, a survivor of a national catastrophe. She was repaired and became a cadet training ship, a quieter role for a vessel that had seen so much horror. But Russia itself was not quiet. The 1905 defeat had sparked a revolution that was brutally suppressed, but the underlying discontent never went away. When World War I erupted in 1914, the Aurora was called back to active service, performing patrol duties in the Baltic Sea. But the real war for Russia's future was not being fought against Germany. It was being fought in the breadlines of Petrograd, as St. Petersburg was now called, and in the mutinous hearts of its soldiers and sailors. By 1917, the Russian Empire was on the brink of collapse. The war had been a disaster, with millions of casualties, widespread food shortages, and a complete loss of faith in the Tsar's government. In February, this simmering rage boiled over. Protests and strikes paralyzed Petrograd. When soldiers were ordered to fire on the crowds, they refused and joined them instead. The revolution had begun. This revolutionary fever spread like wildfire to the sailors of the Baltic Fleet, who had long been a hotbed of radical politics. Aboard the Aurora, which was docked in the city for repairs, the crew was listening intently. On February 28th, the sailors rose up. They joined the revolutionary cause, and in a brutal act of rebellion, the ship's captain and executive officer were killed by the mutinous crew. The Aurora, a symbol of imperial power, had now become a floating fortress of revolution, its sailors among the most dedicated and armed supporters of the Petrograd Soviet, the powerful council of workers and soldiers. Throughout the turbulent months of 1917, Russia was in chaos. The Tsar had abdicated, but the new provisional government struggled for control against the increasingly popular Bolshevik Party, led by Vladimir Lenin. Lenin promised the people peace, land, and bread, and by October, he felt the time was right to seize power. The Bolsheviks' Military Revolutionary Committee began to lay the groundwork for an armed insurrection. The cruiser Aurora, with its loyal, revolutionary crew and its powerful 6-inch guns, was a key asset. The provisional government, aware of the threat, ordered the Aurora to put to sea for a patrol, a clear attempt to get the volatile warship out of the city. The ship's crew refused the order. Instead, they pledged their allegiance to the Bolsheviks. On the night of October 25, 1917, by the old-style calendar then used in Russia, history was made. On the orders of the Military Revolutionary Committee, the Aurora steamed up the Neva River and dropped anchor near the Nikolaevsky Bridge, strategically placing itself in the heart of the city. Its presence was a direct challenge to the provisional government, which had taken refuge in the nearby Winter Palace. At 9:40 p.m., a single cannon shot echoed across the city. It was fired from the Aurora's forward gun. Crucially, the shell was a blank. It had no projectile. For decades, Soviet propaganda would portray this as the opening shot of the glorious assault on the Winter Palace, a live round that smashed into the building and began the final battle. The historical reality is slightly different, but no less significant. The shot was not intended to cause damage, but to serve as a signal. It was a thunderous, unmistakable message to all the Bolshevik Red Guards and revolutionary soldiers across the city that the time had come. The final assault on the last bastion of the old government was beginning. The shot from the Aurora was the starting gun for the October Revolution, an event that would create the Soviet Union and reshape the geopolitical landscape for the rest of the century. Following the Bolshevik victory, the Aurora was immortalized. It had earned its place not as a warship, but as the primary symbol of the revolution. It was lovingly maintained and returned to its role as a training ship, this time for the new generation of the Soviet Navy. When the Soviet Union was invaded by Nazi Germany in 1941, the now aging cruiser once again found itself in the line of fire. As German forces advanced on Leningrad, as Petrograd was now known, the Aurora was docked at a nearby port. The city was soon encircled, beginning the horrific 872-day siege of Leningrad. The old cruiser was a prime target for German artillery and air raids. To protect her, the ship was scuttled in the shallow harbor, resting on the seabed but with her superstructure still visible. Even half-submerged, the Aurora fought on. In a testament to her symbolic importance and the desperation of the city's defenders, her guns were painstakingly removed. These 9 cannons, which had once been the pride of the Tsar's navy and had signaled a revolution, were placed on armored trains and positioned on the Pulkovo Heights, a critical part of Leningrad's southern defensive line. Manned by members of her own crew, the Aurora's guns spat fire at the German invaders, contributing to the heroic and unfathomable defense of the city. The ship itself may have been silenced, but its voice still roared in defiance. When the siege was finally broken and World War II ended, the Soviet Union set about rebuilding. A high priority was the salvation of their most cherished revolutionary relic. In July 1944, the Aurora was raised from its watery resting place. The task of restoring her was monumental. She was towed to a shipyard and between 1945 and 1947 was meticulously rebuilt. It was not a simple repair. It was a resurrection. She was transformed into a floating museum, a permanent monument to the October Revolution. In 1948, she was permanently moored on the Neva River, right across from the Nakhimov Naval School, where generations of Soviet and now Russian naval cadets could gaze upon the ship that started it all. For the entire duration of the Soviet Union, the Aurora was more than a museum. It was a shrine. It was designated as Museum Ship No. 1 of the Soviet Navy. Millions of Soviet citizens and foreign visitors walked her decks, looked upon the forecastle gun that fired the fateful shot, and absorbed the foundational myth of the communist state. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the ship's future was uncertain, but her importance to Russian national identity endured. She remained in place, a silent guardian on the river. Between 2014 and 2016, she underwent another extensive overhaul, a multi-million-dollar restoration that brought her back to pristine condition, proving that even in modern Russia, the legacy of the Aurora is too powerful to let fade. Today, the cruiser Aurora remains one of St. Petersburg's most iconic landmarks. She is a ship of contradictions, a vessel of the Imperial Navy that became the symbol of its destruction, a warship whose greatest contribution to history was a single, harmless blank. She is a survivor of Tsushima's inferno, a stage for mutiny, a catalyst for revolution, and a defender during the siege of Leningrad. Few objects in the world have witnessed so much history and played such a pivotal role in its making. She is not just a collection of steel plates and rivets. She is a time capsule, a political statement, and a permanent reminder of the moment the world was shaken to its very core. She is the eternal ship of the revolution. So, the Aurora's story shows how a piece of military hardware can become something more, a symbol that completely overshadows its original purpose. What other tanks, planes, or ships do you think have achieved a similar legendary status, where their story is more important than their combat record? Drop your mission briefing in the comments below, and let us know what piece of military history you want us to investigate next. We read every suggestion and are always looking for our next target. If you've enjoyed this journey through the turbulent waters of history, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. You don't want to be left at the dock when we launch our next deep dive into the incredible stories of war and machinery. Thank you for watching.